Hello everyone, I know it's been a while since I produced a video, but now I'm back! Hello everyone, it's the Metal Geek. How y'all doing? Guys, you may remember some time ago, I reviewed this little device. It's called the Sega Genesis Classic Gaming Console. A little device made by a company called AtGames. Now this is a plug and play, and it does have about 80 games installed on it, though only about 40 of them are official Sega Genesis games. However, it does have a cartridge slot on it, which means you can actually play your original Genesis games on this unit. At the time, I thought this was an awesome little device, and I actually still do. Overall, guys, I'm going to give this a solid 8 out of 10, largely because it actually is a very well made little system. But to say that it was a bit flawed would be a little bit of an understatement, as there was some flaws with this unit. For example, there were no save states, which means you could not save your game progress. And it didn't matter if you were playing the ROM that was installed on the machine, or if you were playing it on a cartridge. You were just unable to save your progress altogether, which made this machine very, very difficult to use if you're an RPG player. And the music. Oh, the music. Guys, that's the one thing that most people did complain about, is that this had horrible, horrible music quality. And while it wasn't the best, I wouldn't consider it horrible, but it certainly definitely was not on key with what the Sega Genesis originally could do. And you may also remember, not that long ago, I did a couple of videos about this little device. This is basically the same classic console, although it's just a portable version of it. Still has the 80 games installed, still has about 40 of them being original Genesis games. But again, the games are great. Sonic the Hedgehog series, Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, Streets of Rage. On newer versions of this, you can get Phantasy Star 2 and 3, and those do save because they added save states to those particular ROMs. But it still had a lot of the same problems. Other than the games that could save because they were included with the save states, you can't save any progress on any other game, so in the sound, certain games fared better than others, but for the most part, the sound emulation was nowhere near as good as the actual video emulation. So that brings me to this little device. Well, not quite so little. It's larger than the other ones, but yeah, you're looking at this right, guys. This is the Sega Genesis Model 1. Well, okay, no, it's actually the Sega Genesis Flashback console, again, made by AtGames. But what makes this device any different than the other two other than the way it looks? Well, let's get into that. First and foremost, the biggest difference is the way it looks. This particular flashback model is modeled to look like the original Sega Genesis, which is unlike the one I just showed you a moment ago. Now, it's not a perfect representation of the original Model 1. It is smaller. It is missing certain features, such as you can't connect a Sega CD to it, so there's no port at the bottom of this particular unit to do that. It doesn't have the volume control button, which was included on the original model, because the original model had a headphone jack on it. In this flashback, it doesn't. It doesn't have the headphone jack included. But other than that, the power button's in the same place, the reset button is in the same place, although in this particular case the reset button is your menu button. And the controller ports are pretty much in the same place as well, though they are shifted a little bit to the side, but it's not really a big deal. It sports the original Sega Genesis logo, though the logo used to be down below the cartridge slot, where in this particular case you're going to get the AtGames logo instead. The power light is in the same spot. It does have a cartridge slot so you can plug in original Genesis games. And on the back, and here's where the other big difference is that you do have your regular DC port, but instead of having AV cables, this model uses HDMI output, which means this outputs at 720p HD. Yeah, I guess you could say that even though AtGames had been making these plug-and-play consoles for a lot longer than Nintendo has been with the Classic Editions, it's no secret that the NES Classic Edition inspired what AtGames was going to do with this model. So while they still make and support their standard definition consoles, this device, this one right here, is meant to compete with the NES Classic on an HD level. But does it hold up to the NES Classic? The SNES Classic? Again, let's take a closer look here. First, let's look at the controllers. There are two of them in the box. They are not Bluetooth wireless, but they're also not infrared wireless. They're 2.4 gigahertz, and they are a vast improvement over the ones that came with the standard definition model. Now these controllers are wireless, and that is nice, but they do use infrared for their wireless connection, not Bluetooth, which means if you're not pretty much pointing right at the system, the controller might not respond or respond all that well. The controllers with the new model, they work. So you can kind of kick back, relax, and you don't have to worry about pointing it right at this console. Nope, they work fine. Again, these are modeled after the 6-button Sega Genesis controllers. And the buttons are very responsive. They seem to have the right amount of resistance when you push them. And the D-pad actually feels pretty good. And it is very responsive. But these controllers support features that even Nintendo's controllers on their Classic Editions do not. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But first, let's get this system plugged in, let's turn it on, and let's show you how this works. Okay, so once you power this on, you're greeted with the AtGames logo before you go into the menu screen. Now, a lot of people who have already reviewed this console complain about this menu screen. They say it doesn't make sense how it's set up and how you navigate it. I actually think it's very intuitive. I like having this broken down into different categories. It really makes it easier to navigate in that respect. I like the fact that it has a folder where you can save your favorite games, so you can just go there without having to surf through the whole thing. And using the B and the C button to go up and down on the menu screen isn't really that much of a big deal. I don't know why people are making a big deal out of it. It's not that inconvenient. The only thing I would suggest here, though, maybe with the next model, is to break the folders down by genre. I think that would be awesome. Like RPG, action adventure, platforming. I think that would be great. Now here's where things get even cooler. First, let's choose a game. Sonic the Hedgehog. It's the classic, everybody chooses it. I think it's just a thing. The game's emulation, which we will talk about in a little bit, is really nice. But here's what I really want to talk about. These 3 buttons on the controller. Well, one's start, and that's pretty self-explanatory. But the other one is menu, and the other one is rewind. The SNES Classic has a rewind feature, but to use it, you have to go back to the menu. And if you want to go back to the menu, you have to go hit the reset button on the console itself. Guys, AtGames put a menu button right on the controller. Where Nintendo wanted authenticity with its controllers, so much so that you can't tell the difference between the original controllers and the classback controllers, AtGames made a controller that is very reminiscent of the original Sega Genesis controllers, the 6-button ones. But they did not shy away from adding features to the controller that increased the convenience for the gamer. You mess up trying to get that Chaos Emerald in Sonic? Rewind it and try again. And you don't have to go back to the menu to do that. Hit the menu button. No fuss, no muss. Sadly, these features are missing from Nintendo's Classic Edition series. And I applaud AtGames for these features because these features should be basic on a controller for a flashback system these days. And Nintendo really dropped the ball when it came to these features. And while Nintendo does offer 4 save states for every single game on their Classic Edition consoles, here AtGames is including 10 save states for every single game. For a company that never had save states on their machines before, which was one of the largest complaints amongst all gamers, they come out of the gate this time saying, hey, you want save states? Okay, here are 10 of them. For every game! But okay, let's face it, we all know what you really want to see here. You want to see the games. You want to see them in action, and you want to know, well, that one burning question. Did AtGames finally fix the sound issues with their flashback consoles? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the answer to that is a resounding yes. Yes, they did, and they did it in a very big way. Here, let's take a look. And here are a few more examples. Guys, I cannot stress it enough. This time around, AtGames got it right. While the emulations aren't pitch perfect, they are far closer than what they were in their other plug-and-play systems. Unless you're a purist and you only play the original Sega Genesis with the original cartridges and the original controllers, most people are going to come into this, play this, and they're not even going to recognize any little differences in the sound or in how the picture looks, because these are fairly close. And the sound on this is very, very good. There's a wide selection of games to play here. Everything from Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2, Sonic and Knuckles, Sonic 3D Blast. They even have the Phantasy Star series on this, and I'm not talking just part 2, 3, and 4, which were on the Genesis. They included the original Phantasy Star from the Master System on this. And yeah, that is awesome. And this isn't the only Master System game that appears. In fact, this system, again, well, Nintendo was going for authenticity with their systems and only including games that were actually on those consoles. Here, AtGames was willing to dig into Sega's library on the Sega Game Gear as well as the Master System. So we have Game Gear games on here, and we also have Master System games on here. Now they do have the arcade bonuses, which are basically homebrew games, but guys, let's be real here. These games aren't that good. Luckily, they only make up 19 of the 85 games that are included, so let's be clear about this. There are 66 games that have officially appeared on Sega consoles. So even if you're like, why are they padding out the numbers? Why have 85? Why don't they just say 66? Well, I get it. They want to make it look like there are more games on there, but this is nothing to complain about, because if you paid $80 for an SNES Classic Edition, you got 21 games. 21 really good games, but 21 games nonetheless. Here, you're paying about the same price, $70 to $80, and you're getting 66 games that are officially Sega Genesis games, or Master System, or Game Gear. And frankly put, if you are an RPG fan, a role-playing game fanatic, you can't not own this system. It has 10 role-playing games on it. There are 10 RPGs. Look at my favorites folder. I've got 9 of the 10 in my favorites folder. There are so many great RPGs here that you can get hundreds of hours, and I do mean hundreds of hours of gameplay alone on. Not to mention you get all the action-adventure games, the platformers, like Sonic the Hedgehog. You got Comic Zone, you got Vector Man 1 and 2, you got Golden Axe 1, 2, and 3. I mean, you have all of these just jump in and play games, and then you have 10 epic RPGs. And they all emulate very well. So AtGames, in my opinion, has made a lot of strides in the right direction with this console. Now, it's not perfect by any means, but they added in save states, they fixed the sound issues, the emulation is pretty close to the originals. This, in my opinion, and this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I do believe that this actually does compete with the SNES Classic Edition. Because even though the emulation is a bit better on the SNES Classic Edition, the emulation on this is actually pretty good too, but it actually supports a lot of features that, quite frankly, Nintendo just looked right past. I'm giving the Sega Genesis Flashback HD a solid 9.5 out of 10. And this is the Metal Geek saying, have a great one, guys. Sega!
I say that you have won. When I say that I have given up. When I say that I have had enough. All you ever do is leave your problems piling up. up. I look around